Picture this. You're at a dinner table. Someone pours a glass of deep ruby red wine into one glass and a pale golden white wine into another. They look completely different. They smell different. They taste like they come from entirely different worlds. But here's the twist. What if I told you that red wine and white wine can come from the exact same grape? Yeah, same fruit, same vine, same origin. So how does one grape turn into two completely different drinks? Today we're diving into the surprisingly fascinating world of red wine versus white wine to uncover what really separates them and why that difference has almost nothing to do with the grape itself and everything to do with what happens after it's picked. Let's get into it, right here on History of Simple Things. Let's start with the basics. Most people assume red wine comes from red grapes and white wine comes from white grapes. That's only partially true. Yes, there are red and white grape varieties. But here's the surprising part. The juice inside almost all grapes is actually clear. Even red or purple grapes, when you crush them, the juice that comes out is nearly colorless. So where does the deep red color come from? Not the juice, not the pulp, it comes from the skin, and that one detail changes everything. The biggest difference between red and white wine comes down to one simple step in the winemaking process: whether the grape skins stay in contact with the juice or not. Red wine process. When making red wine, the grapes are crushed. And then something crucial happens. The juice, skins, seeds, and sometimes stems are all left together to ferment. This process is called maceration. During this time, the skins release color, that deep red or purple, tannins, which give wine that dry, slightly bitter feel, and flavor compounds like berries, spices, and earthiness. The longer the skins stay in contact, the darker and more intense the wine becomes. White wine process. White wine takes a completely different approach. After crushing the grapes, the skins are removed almost immediately. That means no color from skins, very low tannins, and lighter, crisper flavors. The juice ferments on its own, resulting in that familiar pale yellow or golden color. Here's where things get even more interesting. Because the juice inside most grapes is naturally clear, winemakers can actually make white wine from red grapes, as long as they remove the skins quickly enough after crushing. That means no time for the pigments in the skin to bleed into the juice. This style is known as Blanc de Noir, a French term that literally translates to white from black. And it's not just a gimmick, it's widely used in winemaking, especially in sparkling wines where red grapes are often turned into pale, elegant drinks. So yes, a dark purple grape can produce a bright, crisp white wine that looks nothing like its original fruit. If you didn't know how it was made, you'd never guess they came from the same source. And once you realize that, it completely changes how you think about wine. Because it means the final result isn't locked in by the grape, it's shaped by choices. And if winemakers can go from red grapes to white wine, then naturally there's also a way to land somewhere in between. Rose wine sits right in the middle of red and white, not just in color but in character, and it's made using, you guessed it, limited skin contact. Instead of leaving the skins in for days like red wine or removing them immediately like white wine, winemakers let the skin stay in contact with the juice for just a short window of time, sometimes just a few hours, rarely more than a day. That short contact is enough to gently tint the wine, giving rose its signature shades that can range from pale salmon to vibrant pink, but color is only part of the story. That brief skin contact also adds a subtle structure, just a hint of tannin, while still keeping the wine light and refreshing. The result is something uniquely balanced, softer than red, fuller than white, and fruity but still crisp. And interestingly, rose isn't usually made by mixing red and white wine. That's a common myth. It's actually its own carefully controlled process. So in a way, rose is proof that wine isn't about strict categories. It's more like a sliding scale, a spectrum controlled almost entirely by time. Now let's talk about what you actually experience when you drink wine. Because red and white wines don't just look different, they feel completely different in your mouth. And that difference goes beyond flavor. Red wine characteristics. Red wines are typically fuller-bodied, meaning they feel heavier and more substantial when you drink them. They often have bold, layered flavors. Think dark fruits, spices, or even earthy notes. But one of the most defining features is tannin. Tannins come from the grape skins, seeds, and stems, and they create that dry, slightly rough sensation on your tongue, similar to the feeling you get when drinking strong black tea. That's why red wines can sometimes feel a little intense or even slightly bitter, especially for new drinkers. But that intensity is also what gives red wine its structure and depth. White wines, on the other hand, are usually lighter and more refreshing. Without extended skin contact, they have little to no tannins, which means they feel smoother and cleaner on the palate. They also tend to have higher acidity, which gives them that crisp, bright sensation, often described as zesty or refreshing. Flavor-wise, white wines often lean toward citrus, green apple, floral notes, and light tropical fruits, and because they're less heavy, they're often easier to drink casually or in warm weather. So while both wines come from the same fruit, what you feel in your mouth is shaped almost entirely by how that fruit was handled. Both red and white wines go through fermentation. But how that process is handled makes a big difference. At its core, fermentation is simple. Yeast consumes the natural sugars in grape juice and converts them into alcohol. But the environment where this happens can completely change the outcome. Temperature matters. Red wines are usually fermented at warmer temperatures. This helps extract more color, tannins, and bold flavors from the grape skins, making the wine richer and more intense. White wines, on the other hand, are fermented at cooler temperatures. This slows things down and helps preserve delicate aromas like citrus, apple, or floral notes that might otherwise be lost in higher heat. This is why white wines often smell fresher and more aromatic, while red wines feel deeper and more robust. So even something as subtle as temperature plays a major role in shaping what ends up in your glass. Ever heard someone describe a wine as oaky? That's not just a fancy word, it's a real and important part of winemaking. After fermentation, some wines are aged in oak barrels instead of stainless steel tanks. And during that time, the wood interacts with the wine in ways that can dramatically change its flavor and texture. Red wines and oak. Many red wines spend months or even years in oak barrels. During this time, they can develop vanilla-like sweetness, smoky or toasted notes, and subtle spice flavors. The oak can also soften the wine, smoothing out harsh edges and helping everything blend together more harmoniously. White wines and oak. White wines can also be aged in oak, although not all of them are. When they are, the difference is noticeable. Instead of being light and crisp, oaked white wines tend to become richer, creamier, and more full-bodied. They may even take on flavors like butter, vanilla, or baked goods. So even within the category of white wine, you can have something bright and refreshing or something deep and almost dessert-like. And once again, it all comes down to choices made after the grape is picked. You've probably heard people say red wine is dry while white wine is sweet. But that's not really accurate. In wine terms, dry simply means that most of the sugar has been converted into alcohol during fermentation. Both red and white wines can be completely dry or quite sweet depending on how they're made. So why do red wines often feel drier? The answer is tannins. Those compounds create a drying sensation in your mouth, which people often mistake for a lack of sweetness. It's more about texture than taste. White wines with little to no tannin don't create that same effect, so they can feel smoother or even slightly sweet, even when they're technically dry. So what you're sensing isn't just flavor, it's structure. Yes, grape variety does matter, but not as much as most people think. Different grapes naturally contain different levels of sugar, acidity, and flavor compounds, which can influence the final wine. That's why some wines taste like berries, while others taste citrusy, floral, or earthy. But here's the key idea. Even the same grape can produce dramatically different wines depending on how it's processed. The same variety can be turned into a bold red, a crisp white, and a delicate rose. So while the grape sets the foundation, it doesn't determine the final result. That's where the winemaker comes in. And their decisions, from skin contact to fermentation to aging, are what truly shape the wine. Ever noticed how red wine is often paired with steak, while white wine is served with fish? That's not just tradition, it's based on how the wine interacts with food. Red wine plus rich foods. Red wines with their tannins and bold flavors pair well with rich, fatty foods. The tannins help cut through fat and protein, balancing out heavy dishes and making each bite feel less overwhelming. That's why red wine works so well with steak, lamb, and hearty, savory meals. White wine plus light foods. White wines, with their higher acidity and lighter body, pair better with delicate foods. They enhance flavors without overpowering them, and their freshness helps cleanse the palate. That's why they're often paired with seafood, chicken, and salads and lighter dishes. In the end, it's all about balance, matching the weight and intensity of the wine with the food. Let's clear up a few common misconceptions. Myth 1. Red wine is always better than white. Not true. There's no better, just different. It depends on your personal taste, the setting, and what you're eating. Myth 2. White wine doesn't age well. Some white wines can age for many years, developing complex flavors over time. Aging isn't limited to reds. Myth 3. Red wine is always stronger. Alcohol content varies widely. Some white wines can be just as strong or even stronger than reds. So a lot of what people believe about wine isn't based on strict rules, but on generalizations that don't always hold up. Let's bring it all together. Red and white wines can come from the same grapes. They can grow side by side in the same vineyard. They can be harvested on the same day. And yet, what ends up in your glass can be completely different. Why? Because of a handful of key decisions. How long the skins stay in contact, the temperature of fermentation, whether the wine is aged in oak, the overall approach of the winemaker. In other words, Wine isn't just an agricultural product, it's a crafted one. It's shaped as much by human decisions as it is by nature. The next time you take a sip of wine, whether it's red, white, or rose, pause for a second. Because you're not just tasting grapes. You're tasting time, technique, and intention. You're tasting the moment the skins were removed, the temperature it fermented at, the barrel it may have aged in. 2 glasses, 1 fruit, completely different experiences. And once you see it that way, wine stops being just a drink and becomes something much more fascinating. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.